The crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the dusty town square of Silver Creek, Colorado, in 1875, as Rose Anderson's fate was sealed for the price of 37 cents less than the cost of a decent meal. Her tear-streaked face remained stoic, despite the humiliation burning in her chest, her once fine dress now tattered after months of hardship following her father's death and the revelation of his crushing debts. "Sold to Mr. Blackwell," the auctioneer announced, his voice devoid of compassion as he gestured toward the leering saloon owner whose reputation made Rose's stomach turn. As Blackwell stepped forward to claim his property, a commanding voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "I'll pay $50 in gold for the lady." The crowd parted like the Red Sea to reveal a tall figure, sun-bronzed and trail-worn. He stood with one hand resting casually on his gun belt, the other holding a small leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. Rose looked up through tear-clumped lashes at the stranger, a cowboy with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jaw set in determination. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, marking him as no ordinary ranch hand. "Now see here," protested Blackwell, his jowls quivering with indignation. "I won this auction fair and square, $50, the cowboy repeated, stepping closer and tossing the pouch to the auctioneer. "That's more than fair payment for a dead auction, I reckon." The auctioneer, suddenly animated by the unexpected windfall, quickly counted the coins. "The gentleman offers $50 in gold," he announced, eyeing Blackwell with a challenging stare. "Any other bids?" Blackwell sputtered but fell silent. No one in Silver Creek could or would outbid that kind of money for a woman with nothing but debts to her name. "Sold to the gentleman," the auctioneer declared, bringing down his gavel once more. Rose felt her chains of despair loosen fractionally, though uncertainty quickly filled the void. Trading one master for another hardly seemed like salvation, regardless of the price paid. The cowboy approached her, removing his hat to reveal thick chestnut hair. "Miss Anderson," he said in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "my name is Reed Donovan. I'd like to offer you my name and protection if you'll have it." Rose blinked in confusion. "You want to marry me? But you don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I'm offering you a choice which is more than anyone else here was willing to give." Before she could respond, he continued, "My ranch is 3 days' ride from here. You'll have your own room, your own privacy. If after a month you wish to leave, I'll provide you with enough money to start fresh elsewhere. But if you stay—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Well, that would be your choice too." Rose studied him, searching for deceit or cruel intentions, but found only sincere determination. Whatever this man's motivations, they seemed honorable, or at least more honorable than the fate that had nearly befallen her. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. A shadow crossed his features. "Let's just say I understand what it means to be valued less than your worth." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Anderson?" Rose hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his calloused palm. "We do, Mr. Donovan." As Reed led her away from the auction block toward the general store, Rose felt the weight of dozens of stares on her back, some envious, others scandalized. She had been sold for pennies, but somehow rescued with gold. Whatever awaited her at Reed Donovan's ranch, it had to be better than the alternative. The next morning dawned crisp and clear as Rose adjusted herself on the horse Reed had purchased for her, a gentle mare with a chestnut coat. They had spent the night at Silver Creek's only reputable hotel, with Reed taking a separate room after ensuring Rose had a hot bath, a proper meal, and new traveling clothes. "Have you ridden before?" Reed asked as he secured their provisions to his packhorse. "Yes," Rose replied, straightening her spine. "My father taught me when I was young." She didn't add that those lessons had come before her father's gambling addiction had consumed their lives, before her mother had died of consumption, leaving Rose to care for him until his own death 3 months ago. Reed nodded approvingly. "Good. We've got ground to cover." As they rode out of town, Rose felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. The familiar buildings of Silver Creek, her home for 22 years, receded into the distance. She had nothing left there but painful memories and debts she could never repay. "Mr. Donovan," she ventured after an hour of silent riding, "you never said what kind of ranch you own." "Cattle, mostly," he replied, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. "Started with just 20 head 7 years ago. Now I run close to 500. And you manage this alone?" She asked, surprised. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, I've got 5 hands who help with the herd. Good men, and a housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, who comes in 3 times a week from the nearest town." He glanced at her. "You won't be expected to cook and clean for a ranch full of men if that's what you're worried about." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't, that is, I would have done what was necessary." "I'm sure you would," he said, his voice softening, "but that's not why I brought you with me." "Then why did you?" The question that had burned in her mind since yesterday finally escaped her lips. Reed was silent for so long that Rose thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I saw something in you yesterday, something familiar." He adjusted his reins. "Pride, dignity. Even standing on that auction block, you held yourself like someone who knows their worth, regardless of what others say." Rose swallowed hard, fighting unexpected tears. No one had spoken to her with such perception in a very long time. 3 years ago," Reed continued, "my sister was in a similar position. Her husband died, leaving her with debts. I was working a cattle drive in Montana by the time my letter reached me, and I returned to help her." His jaw tightened. "She couldn't bear the shame. Took her own life before I could reach her." "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered. Reed nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "When I saw you standing there yesterday, I saw her, and I couldn't ride away this time." The honesty in his confession struck Rose deeply. This wasn't charity or some sordid arrangement. It was redemption for both of them. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing no other words could suffice. Reed gave her a brief, genuine smile that transformed his weather-worn face. "Let's make camp early tonight. There's a creek about 5 miles ahead with good shelter." As they continued their journey west, Rose found herself studying her rescuer. Reed Donovan was not what she would call handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his strong profile and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. She guessed him to be about 30, though the sun and wind had etched fine lines around his eyes that crinkled when he occasionally smiled. By the time they made camp, Rose's muscles ached from the long ride, but she refused to complain. Instead, she busied herself gathering firewood while Reed tended the horses. "You're good with animals," she observed as she returned to find him speaking soothingly to her mare while checking its hooves. "Animals are honest," he replied, straightening up. "They don't hide what they're feeling or thinking, makes them easier to understand than most people." Rose smiled, the first genuine smile since before her father's death. "I've always thought the same." Something passed between them, then a moment of connection, brief but undeniable. Reed cleared his throat and turned his attention to building the fire. As night fell and they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee, Rose found herself relaxing in Reed's presence. He wasn't much for idle chatter, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. "Where did you learn to run a ranch?" she asked as they sat by the crackling fire, the stars spreading like diamond dust across the vast Colorado sky. "My father had a small spread in Texas," Reed answered, sipping his coffee. "Nothing fancy, but he taught me everything he knew. After the war, I fought for the Union. I drifted for a while, worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny. When I found that plot in the Elk Valley, I knew it was where I belonged." "You fought in the war?" Rose asked, surprised. Reed nodded, his expression growing distant. 4 years. "Enlisted when I was 18, saw things no man should see." He met her gaze across the flames. "Is that something that troubles you, that I fought for the North?" Rose shook her head. My father believed in the Union cause, though he was too old to fight. I share his views. Relief flickered across Reed's face. Good, some folks still carry those grudges even after a decade. Life is too short for such grudges, Rose said softly, thinking of all she had lost, and holding on to them changes nothing. Reed studied her for a long moment. You're wise beyond your years, Miss Anderson. Rose, she corrected him. If we're to be married, you should call me Rose. Rose, he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her heart beat a little faster. And you should call me Reed. She nodded, suddenly shy. Reed. As they prepared for sleep, Reed insisting she take the only tent while he slept under the stars, Rose found herself wondering what kind of marriage theirs would be. A practical arrangement, certainly, but perhaps, in time, something more might grow between them. The thought both frightened and intrigued her. Morning came with a gentle rain that delayed their departure. Rose emerged from the tent to find Reed had already prepared coffee and was cooking flapjacks under a makeshift shelter. You cook? She asked, accepting the tin cup he offered. Badly, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But well enough to survive. Mrs. Abernathy despairs of my kitchen skills. Perhaps I could help with that, Rose suggested before she could stop herself. I'm quite good in the kitchen. I'd welcome that, Reed replied, his smile warming his eyes. Though not because I expected of you. As they ate breakfast, the rain intensified, drumming against the canvas shelter. Reed studied the sky with a frown. Looks like we're staying put today. That trail ahead gets treacherous when wet. Rose nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. After yesterday's revelations, she was curious to learn more about the man she had agreed to marry. As if sensing her thoughts, Reed asked, Tell me about yourself, Rose. What did you do before all this? The question caught her off guard. Few people had shown interest in her life beyond her father's debts. I taught at the schoolhouse in Silver Creek, she replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I loved it, the children, the books, watching them learn. Her voice faltered. But after father died and the extent of his debts became known, the school board asked me to resign. They said it wasn't appropriate for someone in my situation to teach their children. Anger flashed in Reed's eyes. That wasn't right. No, Rose agreed quietly. But I understood their position. A woman with unpayable debts was a scandal in a town like Silver Creek. You could teach again, Reed suggested. There's a schoolhouse about 10 miles from my ranch, small but growing as more families settle in the valley. Hope bloomed in Rose's chest. You wouldn't mind, Reed looked genuinely puzzled. Why would I mind my wife using her education and talents? The word wife sent an unexpected flutter through Rose's stomach. Some men prefer their wives to focus solely on home and family. Reed's expression softened. I'm not some men, Rose. I believe a marriage should be a partnership, each person contributing what they can, supporting the other. Rose stared at him, amazed. In Silver Creek, such views would be considered dangerously progressive. You're not what I expected, Reed Donovan. Is that good or bad? He asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Good, she replied firmly. Very good. The rain trapped them in camp for the entire day, but Rose found she didn't mind. They talked more than they had during the previous day's ride, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing books they had read, even debating politics with a frankness that would have scandalized Silver Creek society. By the time they retired for the night, Reed again insisting she take the tent. Despite her protests, Rose realized she had laughed more today than she had in years. Something was happening between them, something unexpected and fragile and beautiful. The third day of their journey dawned clear and bright. They made good time across the rugged terrain, and by mid-afternoon, Reed pointed to a distant valley nestled between towering mountains. There it is, he said, pride evident in his voice. Elk Valley. My ranch is just beyond that first ridge. Rose followed his gaze and caught her breath. The valley was stunning, verdant meadows dotted with wildflowers, a silver ribbon of river winding through it, and majestic mountains creating a natural fortress around the peaceful scene. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see it in the fall," Reed said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The aspen turn gold, and when the sun hits them just right." He trailed off, seeming almost embarrassed by his poetic description. "I look forward to it," Rose said softly, and meant it. They rode down into the valley, following the river until they came to a wooden bridge. On the other side, a well-maintained trail led them toward a collection of buildings nestled against the base of a pine-covered hill. As they approached, Rose could make out a substantial main house built of logs but larger and more carefully crafted than a typical cabin. A barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings completed the compound. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. "Reed." A voice called, and an older man emerged from the barn, waving enthusiastically. 3 other ranch hands appeared, looking curiously at Rose. Reed dismounted and helped Rose down from her horse, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The touch, though brief, sent warmth spreading through her. "Boys," Reed addressed the assembled men, "this is Miss Rose Anderson, soon to be Mrs. Donovan." Rose felt a blush creep up her neck at the direct introduction but held her head high as she nodded to the men, who stared with undisguised surprise. The older man who had called out recovered first, removing his hat and stepping forward with a warm smile. "Well now, that's the best news I've heard all year. Welcome to Elk Valley Ranch, Miss Anderson. I'm Samuel, the foreman here." "Thank you, Samuel," Rose replied, grateful for his kindness. Reed placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "I'll show Rose to the house. Samuel, would you have the boys take care of the horses?" "Of course, boss," Samuel replied, already moving to take the reins. As they walked away, Rose could hear the excited murmurs of the men behind them. "They seem surprised," she observed quietly. Reed chuckled. "I've been a confirmed bachelor for so long they probably thought I'd never marry. And yet here you are with a bride you purchased at auction," Rose said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Reed stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Is that how you see it, Rose, that I purchased you?" Rose looked away. "Isn't that what happened?" Gently, Reed turned her face back toward his. "No. What happened is I paid off a debt that wasn't fairly yours to bear and offered you a choice when no one else would. What happens next is entirely up to you." The sincerity in his eyes made Rose's throat tighten with emotion. "I'm sorry. That was unfair of me." "No need to apologize," Reed said, his hand dropping back to his side. "I understand this isn't a conventional beginning, but I hope, in time—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Rose understood what he was trying to say. "I hope so too," she whispered. Reed's house was far more comfortable than Rose had expected. Though rustic, it boasted polished wooden floors, a large stone fireplace, and surprisingly elegant furniture that must have been transported at great expense from Denver or even further east. "This is beautiful," Rose said as Reed showed her through the main living area. "My sister helped me furnish it," Reed explained, a shadow crossing his face at the mention of his lost sibling. "She said no one would take me seriously as a rancher if I lived like a savage bachelor, as she put it." Rose smiled, liking his sister already. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Reed agreed quietly. He cleared his throat. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. Mine is at the end of the hall. There's a bathing room between them with a pump and stove for heating water." Rose followed him up the stairs, noting the craftsmanship of the wooden banisters and the surprisingly large windows that let in abundant light. The bedroom Reed showed her to was spacious and airy, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, wardrobe, and even a small writing desk positioned beneath a window overlooking the valley. "This is far more than I expected," Rose admitted, running her hand over the smooth wood of the desk. "What did you expect?" Reed asked, genuinely curious. "Something more. Frontier," she replied honestly. "A one-room cabin, perhaps." Reed's laugh was unexpected and warm. "I've lived in those." Once I could afford better, I saw no reason to continue depriving myself of comfort. A sensible philosophy, Rose said with a smile. I'll leave you to get settled, Reed said, moving toward the door. Mrs. Abernathy left a stew warming on the stove for dinner. Take your time coming down. After he left, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. 3 days ago, she had been facing a life of servitude or worse. Now she was in a beautiful house, with a man who treated her with respect and offered her freedom she hadn't dared hope for. It seemed too good to be true, and years of disappointment had taught Rose to be wary of such apparent good fortune. Yet something about Reed Donovan inspired trust. Perhaps it was the pain she recognized in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, or the way he treated everyone from his horses to his ranch hands with quiet dignity. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into her cleanest dress, Rose made her way downstairs to find Reed setting the table. I hope you're hungry, he said, looking up at her approach. Mrs. Abernathy cooks like she's feeding an army. Starving, Rose admitted, moving to help him without being asked. They ate together at the large oak table, the stew delicious after days of trail food. Conversation flowed more easily than Rose had expected, perhaps because they had already shared so much during their journey. When would you like to be married? Reed asked as they finished their meal, the question so matter-of-fact that it caught Rose off guard. I hadn't thought about it, she admitted. Soon, I suppose, for propriety's sake. Reed nodded. There's a preacher who comes through the valley every 2 weeks. He'll be here this Sunday for services at the town hall. We could speak to him then, if that suits you. 4 days. In 4 days, she would become Mrs. Reed Donovan. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. That would be fine, she agreed, trying to sound as practical about it as he did, though her heart was racing. Reed studied her face. You're sure about this, Rose? You could still, I'm sure, she interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. Unless you're having second thoughts. No, he said immediately, his eyes never leaving hers. No second thoughts. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement that what had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something more. The next few days passed in a blur as Rose settled into life at Elk Valley Ranch. Mrs. Abernathy, a cheerful, plump woman in her 60s, arrived the next morning and nearly wept with joy at finding a proper lady in Reed's house. I've been telling that man for years he needs a wife, she confided to Rose as they prepared lunch together. A ranch this size needs a mistress, and a man like Reed needs someone to care for him proper. He seems quite capable of caring for himself, Rose observed, smiling at the older woman's enthusiasm. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Capable, yes, but there's a difference between surviving and living, Miss Rose. That man's been surviving since his sister passed. About time he started living again. Those words stayed with Rose as she began learning her way around the ranch. Reed was busy with the spring calving, but he made time each evening to show her something new: the vegetable garden behind the house, the apple orchard he'd planted 3 years earlier, the workshop where he crafted furniture during the winter months. You made these? Rose asked in amazement, running her hand over a beautifully carved chair. My father taught me woodworking, Reed explained, seemingly embarrassed by her admiration. Keeps my hands busy during the snow months. You're very talented, she said sincerely. Noting the intricate leaf patterns carved into the wood, Reed's smile was hesitant but pleased. Thank you. By Sunday morning, Rose had become accustomed enough to her new surroundings that the reality of what was about to happen struck her with full force. She was going to marry a man she had known for less than a week, a good man, certainly, but still largely a stranger. As she dressed in her best gown, newly cleaned and pressed by Mrs. Abernathy, her hands trembled slightly. What if this was a mistake? What if the connection she felt with Reed was merely gratitude or, worse, desperation? A knock at her door interrupted her anxious thoughts. Rose. Reed's voice came through the wood. Are you ready? She opened the door to find him dressed in a clean black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked handsome and nervous, a combination that eased her own anxiety somewhat. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirts. "You look very handsome yourself." Reed cleared his throat. "Before we go, I wanted to give you something." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's." "I'd be honored if you'd wear it, but if you don't like it." Rose opened the box to find a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely touched. "Like I said, you don't have to," Reed began, but Rose cut him off. "I would be honored to wear your mother's ring," she said firmly, looking up to meet his gaze. Relief and something deeper flickered in Reed's eyes. He took the ring from the box and with a hand that wasn't quite steady slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. The small church in town was packed with curious ranchers and townspeople eager to witness the mysterious marriage of Reed Donovan to the woman no one had known existed until a few days ago. Rose felt their stares as she walked beside Reed to the front of the church, but found she didn't care what they thought. The only opinion that mattered was that of the man beside her. The ceremony was brief, but surprisingly emotional. When the preacher asked Reed to recite his vows, his voice was clear and unwavering. "I, Reed Donovan, take you, Rose Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect and provide for you, to respect your mind and spirit, to be faithful and true for as long as we both shall live." When it was her turn, Rose found her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "I, Rose Anderson, take you, Reed Donovan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side in all things, to build a life of purpose and joy with you, to be faithful and true for as long as we both shall live." The preacher smiled at them both. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Reed hesitated, his eyes searching Rose's for permission. She gave a slight nod, and he leaned forward to press his lips gently against hers in a kiss that, though brief, sent warmth flooding through her entire body. The townspeople clapped and cheered, but Rose barely heard them. In that moment, there was only Reed and the promise they had just made to each other, a promise that had started as a practical arrangement, but had somehow become so much more. The weeks that followed their wedding were a time of adjustment and discovery. True to his word, Reed made no demands on Rose as a wife beyond her company at meals and occasional assistance with ranch matters that required a second pair of hands. They continued to sleep in separate bedrooms, though Rose sometimes caught Reed looking at her with a longing that stirred answering feelings within her. Rose began teaching at the local school 3 days a week, finding joy in the work and in the warm welcome she received from the valley's families. On the days she wasn't teaching, she helped around the ranch, planted an herb garden, and began keeping the account books, discovering that Reed, for all his practical skills, had little patience for numbers. "You're a godsend," he declared one evening as she showed him how she had reorganized his chaotic ledgers. "I've been putting this off for months. I enjoy it," Rose admitted. "It's satisfying to see everything in its proper place." Reed's hand covered hers on the table, the touch sending a now familiar thrill through her. "You've put everything in its proper place since you arrived, Rose, not just the books." She looked up to find his eyes dark with emotion. Reed, a commotion outside interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Reed was on his feet immediately, moving to the door with the alertness of a man accustomed to trouble. Samuel burst in without knocking, his face grim. "Rustlers, boss. They hit the north pasture. Took at least 30 head and shot young Jim when he tried to stop them." Reed's expression hardened. "How bad?" "Shoulder wound. Doc's with him now," Samuel replied. "The boys are ready to ride after them. Tracks lead toward Broken Rock Canyon." Reed nodded, already reaching for his gun belt. "Tell them I'll be right there." As Samuel left, Reed turned to Rose, conflict evident in his eyes. "Go," she said before he could speak. Jim needs you to catch those men." Relief and gratitude flickered across Reed's face. He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Lock the doors. Samuel will leave 2 men to guard the house." "I'll be fine," Rose assured him, trying to ignore the fear knotting her stomach. "Be careful." Reed cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, not the gentle, chaste kiss of their wedding, but something deeper and more desperate. When he pulled away, they were both breathing hard. "I love you, Rose," he said roughly. "I should have said it before now." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Rose stood in the suddenly silent house, her fingers touching her lips where she could still feel the pressure of his kiss. "I love you too," she whispered to the empty room. The hours that followed were the longest of Rose's life. She paced the house, jumping at every sound, praying for Reed's safe return. By dawn, exhaustion overcame her, and she fell asleep in a chair by the window, still watching the trail for any sign of riders. She awoke to the sound of hoofbeats and men's voices. Rushing to the door, she saw Reed dismounting, his face grim but unharmed. Behind him, several of the ranch hands were leading horses carrying what appeared to be bodies wrapped in blankets. Reed. She called, running to him without regard for propriety. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "We recovered the cattle and caught the rustlers. And Jim," she asked against his shirt, "he'll be fine." "Doc says he's young and strong." Reed pulled back slightly to look at her face. "You're exhausted." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Not until I knew you were safe." Something in Reed's expression softened. He turned to Samuel, who was watching them with an approving smile. "Take care of things here. I'm taking my wife home." The ride back to the house was silent, both of them too tired for conversation. Once inside, Reed insisted on making Rose tea while she sat at the kitchen table, her body suddenly leaden with delayed reaction. "What happened?" she asked as he placed a steaming cup before her. Reed sighed, running a hand through his dusty hair. "The rustlers were part of the Decker gang. They've been hitting ranches all through the territory." His jaw tightened. 2 of them won't be rustling anymore. The others were turning over to the marshal in town. Rose reached across the table to take his hand. "I'm sorry you had to do that." "So am I," Reed said quietly. "I've never taken satisfaction in killing, even when necessary." "That's because you're a good man," Rose said firmly. "The best man I've ever known." Reed's eyes met hers, vulnerability and hope warring in their depths. "Did you mean what you said before I left, about loving me?" Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You heard that." "I wasn't sure," Reed admitted. I hoped." "I do love you," Rose said, finding courage in his uncertainty. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day on the trail, when you told me about your sister, and I realized what kind of man you truly are." Reed stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I've loved you since I saw you standing on that auction block, head held high despite everything. But I never dreamed you might come to love me back." "How could I not?" Rose whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Reed leaned down to kiss her, and this time there was no interruption, no hesitation, only the deep, abiding love that had grown between them against all odds. Later, as they lay together in what was now truly their bed, Reed traced gentle patterns on Rose's bare shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed softly. "A wife, a true partnership. For years the ranch was enough." "And now?" Rose asked, nestling closer to his warmth. "Now I can't imagine life without you," he replied simply. "You've made this house a home, Rose. You've made me whole again." Rose smiled against his chest. "It works both ways, you know. When my father died, I thought I had lost everything: my family, my home, my dignity. But I found all of that and more with you." Reed tightened his arms around her. "When I paid that gold for you, I thought I was saving you. I never realized you would save me right back." "Perhaps that's what love is," Rose mused sleepily. "Saving each other over and over again in all the ways that matter." As she drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the humiliation of being sold for pennies to the triumph of being valued beyond price. Whatever challenges the future held, she would face them with Reed by her side, their love a gold more precious than any coin. In the years that followed, the story of how Reed Donovan had paid gold to call Rose his wife became something of a legend in Elk Valley. Their ranch prospered, as did their family, first with the birth of their daughter Rebecca, then their son Robert 2 years later. Rose continued teaching until the school board appointed her headmistress, while Reed's reputation as a fair and successful rancher spread throughout the territory. Together, they built not just a home but a legacy of love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, a legacy that proved, beyond all doubt, that sometimes the most valuable things in life cannot be measured in pennies or gold, but in the courage to see the worth in another person when the rest of the world has turned away.